Hey everyone, and welcome to the third part in my kick series. So first of all, just exclude the excuse the quality of the mic. I'm just using like a shitty kind of Skype mic for this. But yeah, so basically, I just wanted to show you how I go through doing my kicks now. I posted the last two articles on my blog, which you should go and check out. You'll be able to find them in the post again. My website, which is www.sammorgan.squarespace.com. Yeah, and I basically just wanted to take a look at how my kicks are done now, because my methods have changed a little bit since last time, and I think I've got a few tips and tricks and a few different techniques of how I approach things now that are a little bit different, which I thought would be interesting to share. So first of all, let's just take a look at what I've got. So I've literally just set up like a really simple project here. I've got a few different kicks. I've got a 909, I've got an 808, and I've also got kick 2, which is like a really cool like custom kick thing from Sonic Academy, which I will go through a bit later on. But there's a few things that are kind of important. I'm using this thing here, which is great. I think everyone should basically get this. It's really useful for looking at transients in your kicks and just generally in your music. So it's super important. It's free actually. Check it out. And I just stick it on my master chain. I also have a spectrum analyzer set up ready to go, and it's really important, guys, to set these ranges here. So instead of having it in auto, which means that it makes no sense and it completely reacts to the volume of what's coming in. As you can see there, if you stick it on ranged and set it to a certain amount, you actually have something that's like really congruent and you'll be able to use like every single time basically. So it's much better way of working. Yeah, so I just got like a few different bass lines here. I've got like a real subby bass, and I've got more of a kind of sort of mid-rangey type thingy here, and then just like some chords, some like pretty standard dub chords. So yeah, what I wanted to first show you is basically how I do this long kick reverb thing and sort of how I put all my stuff together. So first of all, if you guys don't have this plugin, Drummerzone, I highly recommend you get it, especially if you're making techno or house, or you're looking at any sort of music where you might want 909s, like a kind of a real punchy kick. It's fantastic basically for these controls. So I've actually mapped attack, tune, decay, pitch and tune depth down into a rack down here. So as soon as I load, this is also in my template, so as soon as I load a track up, I've got these controls just like ready to go, and instantly, just even using those controls, you can start getting a whole different range of kicks. So attack, for example, I usually always turn down. Tone, I can kind of get like kind of a softer or a harder kick. And notice as well, while I'm doing all this stuff, notice what that's actually doing over here in the oscilloscope. You can see that's kind of like softening up the attack a bit there. Decay, obviously, really great, very important. And then pitch and tune depth are really interesting. Pitch basically looks at the fundamental, so you can see in the frequency analyzer here of the EQ, as I move the pitch up and down, the fundamental frequency is moving up and down. So that's really important to tune to your track, which is usually what I do. And then the drop depth is really cool. So this basically adds a bunch of high frequency, sort of mid frequency information in around here, and it's actually how fast the range of the sine that drops down to 0. So you can see if I pull it all the way down, I basically get like a much cleaner kick in the sense of like a fundamental. Now this can be good and bad depending on sort of what type of music you're making or what your track's doing, which I'll explain a bit in a minute. So I usually leave these somewhere around default, and then I can start playing around once I've got something in my track. So let's take a quick look now at my kick verb. So I also have this loaded up to start with in my track by default, with my kick usually knocking at -12. And as soon as I turn this on and just send the kick to it, I instantly just start getting into that real sort of techno territory. So I'll break down what I've got here. I've got a reverb, taken off all the input processing. I've processed the diffusion a little bit so it sort of cuts off a bunch of the high frequencies, turn the chorus off, and that's kind of that really left alone. The stereos are right down to nothing because we don't want it to be stereo at all because it's pretty low frequency information. I've then just chucked a saturator on top, and just like cranked up the drive. You'll get a bunch of different tones by just sort of scrolling through the different types of saturation there. A compressor just to sort of rein it in. I'm using quite a quick attack here just to actually really clamp down on the front of it. This sound is quite a sort of long sustained sound, so I actually don't want there to be much punch coming out of this, which is why the attack is so short. Fairly average amount of compression going on there, like not too long. I'm just really trying to cut the actual sort of punch out of this sound. And then just with the EQ, that will sort of come into play a little bit later on, but it's basically just cutting all of the top end out. I've mapped that over here, so I can kind of really get down to either sort of almost sustaining the kick drum if it's really down low, or giving it a bit more of a sort of like whomp up a bit higher. The next thing that's really important actually while we're over here is just these controls. So what I've done is I've mapped, basically these are all a bunch of controls you can see I've mapped here from the reverb, and literally just playing with these controls and these controls together, you can basically just make any sort of kick you want in that world. It's ridiculous. I should just play around with them until I get something that works. So you can see here, just by moving, you know, like that's a really nice one. So it's just a whole bunch of controls really, and then it really helps. I haven't actually got any controllers here, but I used to have it set up when I had my controllers, so I would have a rack of 16 knobs mapped to these controls here and these controls here. When you go between them, you just play around so you get something that works with your track basically. So let's just take a look. You can see like that's just giving you a completely more like an 808 vibe, something that's really quite bassy. That just kind of lifted the whole thing up. It's almost like that almost kind of becomes like a sort of secondary tuning, the room size, when you play with that. Anyway, so that's kind of the first part of it, and what you'll find is that using different reverbs, I mean I could change this to like an eco, and I'm going to get a different vibe straight away. Let me just bring this pitch back up here. If I change this around to like a bunch of different, you know, I'm going to get a bunch of different effects for different reverbs, and obviously using different saturators and stuff, all of that is going to affect the sound. But usually this is what I'll do, is I'll start off, I'll just get a rough idea of what I want first using these, and then sort of like build the rest of the track around it. To then sort of strengthen, I guess, my kick, what I will often do, the reason that I like the attack down is that I think that this sort of attack sounds a bit weak, just a bit crap, and it's very high range. You're also getting a huge spike up here, which is not really what we want, because that's going to kind of play havoc with a lot of your sort of compressors and stuff, especially group compression. You're not actually getting much of the sound out of that. It's not really going to give you that much. I normally bring that back down and then actually sort of build attack in using processing. So generally I'll bring a high pass down here, and you can here now we've got to this really lovely part of the sound, but we've lost quite a lot of attack. So what I then tend to do is have a couple of different stages of saturation. So you can hear instantly just by turning that on. All that is I can actually just bring a blank saturator in. Where do we go? Blank saturator, there we go. So this just instantly starts to thicken everything up, and you can also, if you want to, then bring a bit of attack in, because this will kind of work like a compressor. I mean, saturation is basically just compression anyway, in a slightly different way. So, and then by playing with this attack knob and the EQ, you can really get yourself some nice attack tones, nice sort of attack characteristics. If you want to keep it quite low down and dirty like this, you could also bring in a lot more kind of punch or sort of definition by then whacking another saturator in. I usually go for 2 or 3 saturators in series and just back them off a bit, and play around with different types. Like, that's kind of cool. But then this section down here is really useful, so it's really interesting. So the bass section, this basically controls how much of the saturation is going to affect the really low part of the sound, sub-frequencies, which often are the first thing to kick off like the sort of extra unwanted saturation. So here, as I turn that up, we're getting into like GABA territory. I bring the bass down, it really just sort of starts to tame everything off. Obviously I'm clipping like crazy here, but you can hear the difference. That just destroys your sound, and with this you kind of get a level of almost like a dry wet of how much you want the low end to be sorted out. So that has made a really big difference. Let me just bring this back down to a more reasonable amount. Cool. Then the other thing that you can do is this here, this depth, width and frequency. So this is kind of almost like an EQ. It's like a secondary band on the saturator. So if I bang this up really high, and then using this frequency, it will sweep down through the sound that's being put into it and accentuate a certain part of the sound. So you can hear, as soon as I start to get down to here, I'm starting to get a bit more attack in my sound. If I narrow it up a bit, it gives me a bit more of actual punch. And you can see also on the frequency analyzer, on the oscilloscope here, if you look at the front portion of the sound, as I bring this up, it really sort of tends to thicken that up a bit and make it a lot more consistent, so you're really getting a nice sort of punch in there. And then again, I can widen this to make it sort of a little bit differently pronounced, and you can really hear it down here. It's like really smacking that particular frequency, and all of these kind of controls, when you tune them around, can really make a big difference in the sound. So I usually spend a while, I'll get something like this, which will kind of be what I'm after, and then I will sort of build a track, and using these different controls I can usually sort of fine tune the kick to get the sort of space and the vibe that I want. I usually then rarely will compress it afterwards, because I find that this way of shaping the sort of transients gives you you don't really need to compress it afterwards, because it's pretty, you've got it to how you want it to be in your track. Cool. So that's kind of that big reverby thingy. Now, the other thing that you can do, which is really cool then, and you can get some really interesting results, is if you want to make a really interesting bass off of that. If I make a new audio track, and I'll feed my kick verb from it. So my kick verb's over here, and I'm feeding that into this channel. So I'll just pop over to session, and I just record, say, I don't know, 8 bars or so, maybe a bit longer. And this channel here is now recording the kick verb, right? So if I play around with this, So I've now just got a bunch of like, you know, bunch of low end stuff I can do things with. So if I pull this back into here, and I'll go into the clip itself, and I'll just set up a loop. Say as long as I want, really. I'll turn this track off now. Say like a bar, and just select that and loop it. And now I can just shift around between these different ones and sort of pick the ones that I like the most. And this is generally quite important because if you've got what I find is on this channel here, if you've got a particularly long decay time, the decay sort of start the decay tail of the reverb sort of starts feeding into itself, and can kind of really alter the sound over time, which can sound cool, but in terms of like a low end thing, you kind of want something a bit more solid. So often to resample it and stick with the same one is really useful. So anyway, I've turned this off now. Let's just play this. So even just from that, that's given me a pretty cool sound. And I can obviously just treat this like a normal sound, like whatever, yeah. Just find where. Just find the bits that I want. I could maybe move it to a bit where I changed it. So you kind of got like a cool rhythm going on now underneath. And you can really go mental with this. Like you can go as far as you want. So, you know, if I go over here somewhere till I've got it a bit more raggo. Like that's pretty cool as like a pulse. Okay, let's like stick with this. So I duplicate this down and just sort of make sure that this is really hitting at my zero crossing, so I'm not getting any annoying little clicks. Okay, it can be quite hard to do. You can always declick that later, but yeah. And then I can consolidate this. So I crop the sample. Cool. And now, make sure the start point is actually there anyway, so that's fine. Now I can really sort of like, you know, really go mental with this if I wanted to. Cool, so that's given me a cool little rhythm that I can work with. I could pitch this around further if I wanted to. Well, I mean, that's super low, but again, it's a pretty nice effect. And of course, like anything that you do at the back of this is going to work because you've put it into your track. You could also then, you know, you could maybe like stick a resonator on here, or make maybe corpus, for example. You know, and tune it to your track. So I think we're in G here, G minor. Just play around with something different. So you get something kind of cool. That's pretty interesting. You know, it's all like fucking tons of options you can do with that. So then it comes about how do we actually put all of this stuff together. So the next thing really I want to talk about is basically using like mixing sort of your kicks and your basses together. So let's go back to just something like this, something like that. So it's pretty intense, but it's also quite short and manageable, right? And I've done a whole bunch of stuff like this, and you can hear it changing. You can hear it changing there actually. That's probably because of all the automation. Let's just delete all of this quickly. Yeah. Cool, we'll just stick with that for now. Yeah, stick with that. Alright, so then I've just got a couple of basses here, so this is a sub bass. Now obviously you're not really going to be able to hear that because there's so much coming from here, like this all in that range. And if we're looking at this sub bass here, what is it? It's like 49. So you're going to have to basically cut a whole bunch out. So we can go into here, bring it back up, maybe even leave it a bit more to give you a sense of what you're after. And the sub bass is literally just using Serum. It's just a sine wave basically. You know, you can add a few different harmonics and stuff if you want, but it's basically just like use anything you want for that. And then usually what I do is I'll be looking at my kick on the sort of master. Now this is something that's really important to understand, which I kind of only really just worked out the other day, is that if we just solo the kick for now, so you can see that the fundamental here is quite pronounced, right? So a lot of types of music, if you want, what people tend to do is they'll get into this really complicated process of like EQing everything together and doing all this stuff, which does and can work, or like using sidechain for example. But really the problem that you have is that your fundamental, your kick drum and your bass line are kind of clashing. And if you look at a lot of stuff that has really prominent basses, like the actual bass itself is really prominent as opposed to just like the general wob, is the kicks are either just a fair bit lower in volume, but they'll have a really full kind of response like we've got here, minus this fundamental tone. So to show you what I mean, at this point, as soon as you bring this sub in, the two frequencies are kind of really competing with each other and they're right in their faces and it just isn't gonna work, right? So also it's a little bit out of tune. So what's the tune of the bass? That's G, so, and that's an A sharp, so we just need to bring this down a little bit. It's H, yeah, so probably just down one or two. Yeah, somewhere around there. So what we kind of need to do now is basically bring an EQ up and actually just bear in mind saturation generally tends to add a lot of low end gump in. It's just bring down this fundamental a fair bit until we get something it's a bit kind of flatter. The fundamental isn't sticking out as much, and what you see now is that this bass is really standing out. That's really going to give you this sense of like sub popping through like on a big system, but you're still going to get a lot of weight out of the kick drum. And obviously again you would fine tune that to taste, but just in terms of sound and time. Now the next thing that I generally tend to look at, always making sure I'm leveling volumes as well, that's usually going to be somewhere about right, is then satin. So satin, if you guys don't know this, is incredible. So this is It's like a saturation device made by Yuhi, the guys that done Zebra and Basil, blah blah blah. And it's just amazing for basses and kicks. So what we're going to look at is I'm going to put a satin. I've got a satin on both the sub bass and on the kick. I've just got it in the default studio mode right now. If we open the service sections down here, you start getting into some really interesting territory. Now I don't know exactly what this does based upon the frequency analyzer here. It's basically kind of like a bunch of different EQ curves that are being put into the track, but I'll show you what happens when you use it. It's just, you can get some really interesting results, and you can really sort of gel the kick and the bass into each other. So first of all, we'll take off the asperity, which is what gives you that kind of real sort of hissy sound, so we don't really want that, so I'll get rid of that. Then it's basically just about gap width, bump, azimuth, speed, preemphasis, these encoders and the circuits, and you basically sort of like pick and choose them and scroll between them, and you can find ways in which the kick and the bass really just nicely slot into each other. So let's see if we can get it working now. So you usually chuck the bump up quite a bit, which makes it really, brings you that bump up there. And I don't know if you can actually hear what this is doing on your system, but you can really, like, especially if you play around with these. And to keep an eye on this while I'm doing it. Now, the other thing that I usually do is this can introduce some weird left-right phasing thing, some panning things. So I usually just put utility and bring it smack down to 0, so it's a mono. And then I just play around with these till I find a place where that kind of works. And the kick and bass kind of sit into each other. So let's now go to the bass. Sometimes this happens really easily, sometimes it takes a while to get it. Let's just get a utility on the sub bass and monitor that out as well. Yeah, so that kind of generally tends to mold together quite well, but you can see even just affecting that really kind of shifts the focus of the sound. And when you're working in the with a sort of more full track and something that's together there, you can really get some really interesting sounds coming out of it, and it just very nicely can gel. Yeah, that's really nice. Can really gel things together, and you can see what it's kind of doing here. But what I find is that if I look at the spectrum afterwards, it's sort of only slightly imparting that information onto the sound. It's not really making it a massive difference from what I can see, so it's still quite a subtle technique, and this works with pretty much everything as well. So if I've got another bass here that's a bit more higher up, let's maybe bring the frequency down a little bit. I'll just do the same thing, so like that instantly straight away just really tightens it up. some really interesting sort of phasing effects, panning effects going on. And often I just sort of switch through these until I find one that happens to sit with the elements better than one another. And then just leveling everything out to make sure we still got a bit of focus. And then once I think I've got a level that's pretty good, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to check over here at the master and make sure that there's still a pretty solid kick coming through all the time. So transient of the kick still coming through. In this case it's not coming through as strongly as I'd like, so this is when I would probably turn to a tiny little bit of sidechain, but I'm talking a very minimal amount. Potentially bring the kick up a tiny bit as well. But I would usually spend a bit more time. Yeah, so there it's starting to be a little bit more consistent. Usually I would spend a little bit more time on the actual satins and things to get them sounding a bit better. Sometimes I'll use the satin on here as well, just to tune up the kick bar. But between these sorts of things, you can usually get some pretty solid sounding stuff going on. So we'll just also have a quick look at the 808. So again, the same kind of things apply here. That can give you a lot more of a 30 forward sound if I just take the high cut off and just bring the attack up a little bit. Give you a kind of softer sound. Again, I'll usually run a couple of different saturators in there, a couple of different EQs, but I'm really not doing like that much to the sound really in the long term. It's just very subtle changes here and there. The other thing that can be a real nice little bump, a nice little improvement is, like, let's say I've got something like this and the kick is sounding perhaps a little bit cold. What I find is that if I work out what the fundamental frequency of the kick is, so here we're on what, like a G sharp. If I then go and add in, and I'll use Pro Q for this. This is just finding it's a bit better for adding. So that's our fundamental somewhere around there. If I then go, let's find the G. So that's there. So if I then go and add the G sharp in an octave up, which is going to be here, yeah, sort of 100 hertz or so, usually around this range, really quite tight. Let's just bring it up. Maybe not so much with this kick, but it generally tends to warm the kick up a little bit, giving you this higher octave. Still kind of fundamental, so it'll work in tune with the track. You'll just, cut a bit of this stuff out if you want. Yeah, depends a lot on the track, but often try that. Just try sticking a little bump in a bit further up. Just not too much, like 2 or 3 dB, and you'll get quite a significant kind of boost in the quality of the sound. It can sort of help it cut through, especially if it's a really subby sort of mix like this one. Cool, so that's kind of it really. Now the only reason that I wanted to show you this, just check this works. Yeah, so this is a demo version because I'm trying it out right now. I will shortly be buying this plugin, I've decided. But so this is really interesting because if you look at what we've got here, so let's just turn this off for now. Let's take a look at what this kick is doing. So what's really useful about this is that if you find a kick that you kind of like, or you look at another person's track in an analyzer and you look at the way in which a waveform looks, it can really give you some insights as to like how the kick is made and what it's going to do. Now, I'm not saying that that's definitely how you should approach things every time, but it can be a really useful learning tool. And what I often find is that if there's a kick that I like in someone else's track, it will take me a while to get there in terms of the physical shape of the waveform using all these sorts of different processes, right? But with something like this, kick here, if I take the top part off, using the amplitude envelope, I can really quickly get a kick that's sitting how I would wish it to sit. So let's say I wanted to, let's run through a different, okay, so this is an 808 style kick, yeah? So let's say I wanted to shorten this kick up and make it really sort of full and fat, for example. So I'd literally, because this at the moment is not punching through our mix at all, right? Take the click off. It's a bit better now, but it's quite big and thick and full and floppy and flabby. And I could, you know, use envelopes and all that kind of stuff to sort it out, or compressors rather, but I could just use the amplitude envelope in here to really sort it out. So I could bring it back to a length that's musically relevant to my track. So I could just pick, say, like that, which is, let's have a look. So that's 492 milliseconds. So I can go back into here, change this to 492 milliseconds. So, very close. So I've now tightened it up completely. Yeah, it's a lot more rhythmically in time with my tune. Right, then just add a point in here. I can really just like start to dynamically shape this kick, add as much attacking as I want. It basically just completely removes the need for compressors. And you see I'm still at the same volume as I was before, but if I bring this back down, look at the difference in sound that I'm getting and how much more presence and impact I'm getting off that kick. The volume here is what, -6 volume, but I'm getting so much more impact and like weight. And to do that using, you know, a bunch of these different processes is just, you know, it's not as precise, shall you say. But then you can obviously just tune it to your track and choose the type of drop that you're going to be getting. There you go, I've just added a bunch more attack in. Softer. So you can really just fine tune it frequency wise to like where you need it to sit in your track. It's fantastic. And then you've got over here, you've got a bunch of different samples you can layer in on top. Like it's literally just, this is why I'm going to be getting this. That's just really, really nice right there. And what was that? Just randomly picked one. And if you really want to get anal, you can show the different parts and really look at like phase aligning your shit, which to be honest, I think that's a bit of a fool's game really. It's going to be way too clinical, especially for techno, but you can get, you know, just some amazing sounds. Filters over here, you got a bit of distortion if you want it. And the other really cool thing, which I haven't seen in any other kick creation device, let's mute that. Got this sub control thing down here, right? So you can choose your waveform that you want for your sub to be. So if we go back, so this is our sub, yeah, lower one. So we've got a sine. Now we can just, this harmonics thing does nothing here, but this is like a partials thing. This is kind of like operator if you ever use that. So you can basically so you can get a whole range of unique tones going on. And really sort of add some resonance and like hum to your kick, which for some genres, especially like side shots for example, can be really, really useful if you get the hum right. And that's only just for the sine. I mean, you know, go and make a kick with like a square. Yeah, it's mental. The compressor, whatever, it's not really that great when you got this level of control. But yeah, so that kind of is concluding my my kick drum tutorial, I guess. Just have a quick look at what this is doing frequency wise. You generally want to tend to, you know, tend to look at what the EQ is doing. Oh yeah, so that's the other thing. It also becomes really easy in this to remove this big peak without really sort of negatively impacting the sound. So if I bring up the thing here, and you just basically play around with the pitch or the amp or the length even. The length will completely remove it, but you're not going to get much of that in the rest of the track, which isn't going to be too good. Let's have a look. Just going to add more in. So I haven't played around with it. As I said, I've just been trying it out the last day or two, but pretty sure there'll be a bunch of kicks in here. Yeah, like that one. That one, say for example. And you just got fundamentals basically not there. And that will just sit really nice with the bass then. Because you can just level it out. So that the two of them are really nicely working together, and you've got all of this range here for the kick to do stuff with, and the bass is just like totally free to, you know, to reign around as it wants. Especially if you've got, you know, if your kick is if your bass is sort of moving up and down a lot. See that the kick is sort of sitting around here, and you've got all this lovely peak space for the bass to knock through, and the kick's still going to sound, you know, pretty fat on a system. Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at with my kicks now. Hope everyone has enjoyed this and got something out of it. Stay tuned for more bits and pieces from me. I'm going to do pretty soon, I'm going to do a tutorial on getting from loop to arrangement, because I know that's something that a lot of people want. So yeah, stay tuned, and I will catch up with you soon. Cheers guys.